We are in the book of Yaakov. Is that not correct? The book of Jacob, the book of James. All the same thing. James chapter 4. Now, what we see here, quick review, chapter 1, he's warning about dead faith and alive faith, right? Two kinds of faith. And the dead faith, does that save you? No. And dead faith is what? Faith without works. In other words, the faith is not manifesting itself, which means it's dead faith. Then you have a live faith that saves you, which is manifested in the works. Okay, then we saw some of the specific sins that the church is dealing with. One was favoritism, the good old boy club. He says, in your gatherings, which is really synagogue, when you guys get together for synagogue, you're showing favoritism towards this rich person. If it's a poor person, you said, now you sit down here at my feet, which of course, that's a very bad thing. Then we got to chapter 3, a very terrible, hideous, untamable sin called your tongue. What we say. So, it's not just what we say, but, it is not just what we do, but it's also what we say. So, we got into that. And now in chapter 4, we have more warnings coming up. So, he left off in chapter 3 saying, in verse 16, where jealousy and selfish ambition exists, there is disorder in every evil thing. That's the earthly demonic wisdom. Remember, two kinds of wisdom. One's earthly and demonic, and the other is from God. Comes from above. So, he's now going to get down to the crux of the matter. Okay, you have all these conflicts, this favoritism, all this other stuff. But where's that coming from? Is everything from the devil? No. We don't even need any help from the devil to sin, right? We don't need any help in that department. I don't. I know that. Now, when he shows up, it's really the enemy, because Satan doesn't know who I am or who we are. He's off in the Middle East somewhere, doing this thing. Because he can't be in more than one place at a time. The underlings are the ones that are assigned to us and that badger us. Okay? Not Satan himself, but his underling. He's going to talk about, where does all this fleshliness come from? Where does all this, selfish ambition come from, right? Where does all this jealousy come from? Well, we're going to find out. Chapter 4, verse 1. What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? Now, your members is another way of saying in your body. You have different kinds of pleasures and that you seek after, and it's because of the body. The sex drive. Was that from God? Yeah. Be fruitful and multiply. Okay, it was from God. The problem is, with fallen mankind, you take that drive and you put it in these bodies, and that body has urges, then those pleasures will manifest. So that word for pleasures is actually hedone. And we get the word, he's a hedonist. That's where we get the word. He's a pleasure seeker. He's totally given over to his drives and his urges. He's a hedonist, right? That's where we get the word. Somebody given over to their pleasures and their own urgings, as manifested through this body. It's your urges for that hedonism. It's your urges for those pleasures that is causing all this conflict. And it's true, okay? He says this in verse 2, you lust and you do not have. Now, lust, it just means a strong desire for something. It doesn't necessarily mean something that's bad, because it's used sometimes like Paul said, he used the same word, I've not lusted, but I desire to do this with you. I think it was to the Corinthian church. Jesus said, I desire to have this meal with you. Not bad things. We tend to think of something like a sexual lust, okay? But it depends on how the word's translated. So he's saying you lust, or you strongly have an urge for something and you don't have it. You can't have it. You can't manifest it. So you commit murder. Now, I think the primary meaning here is the murder that they are committing is where Jesus said in Matthew, he said this, "You have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to court." But then he goes on to say, if you hate your brother, you commit murder. He's talking about murder in your heart. And so that's what he's talking about, the conflicts that they had. They were committing murder in their heart with their fellow Christian brother and sister. He says, you're envious and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. So if you ask God, he'll give it to you, right? Another trick question, right? Not necessarily. Great answer. I guess it depends on what you're asking for. And he's going to explain in the next verse, there's a very important factor, okay, that you have to line up with God. Verse 3, you ask and do not receive, talking about receiving from God, because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your hedonism or on your pleasures. You're just looking to fulfill that lust and that pleasure that you have in your members. Now, if you pray to God, God, help me die to self. Help me not to be so selfish. Help me not to be so fleshly. Now, that's a prayer that God will hear, right? If you're sincere, he'll hear that. If you pray, oh God, that cute guy down the street or that cute gal, I sure like to get with them and maybe give him a back massage or whatever. Maybe that's not a prayer that he would hear. And I'm not trying to be funny, but you know what I mean, right? You're trying to fulfill your own lust. It says in 1 John, we went over this whole list of things in prayer. We ask the things that are pleasing to him. And we walk according to his will. It had a whole list of things that we went through. So here James just says, hey, you're asking with the wrong motives. Okay? And you got to ask yourself, is this something that draws me closer to God? Or it's just, I'm sick and tired of this situation. I just want relief or something. Okay, well, that's the motive. Now, he says this in verse 4. He says, you adulteresses. It is actually in the text itself, it is adulteresses, but he's not just singling out the women. I mean, that's obvious, okay? I think it's because the church itself as a whole is looked at as the bride of Christ, as kind of a female, right. And this is a love story. This is, Jesus is our fiance. We're the bride of Christ. And now he's calling us adulteresses. It's just like in the Old Testament when you had Israel, which was the wife of the father. He accused her of going off and committing adultery. Israel as a whole was the wife of Jehovah, the wife of the Father. Okay? And so this is kind of the same thing from what I see. It's not a male-female thing. It's that you as a church, he says this, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. That should slap all of us. Yeah. That should really slap all of us. It's funny, earlier he had talked about this in James. He talked about Abraham in James 2:23 being a friend of God. Now he's talking about being an enemy of God. How is Abraham a friend of God because he believed God, and it resulted in his obedience to sacrifice, be willing to sacrifice his own son, right? So he was called the friend of God. Here he's saying, oh, by the way, there's another kind of friendship which you don't want. That's friendship with the world. What is the world? The word is cosmos. It's not this big dirt cloud that we live on that circles around the sun. Okay? That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about this system of things. Who is the God of this world? Satan. 2 Corinthians 4:4. He's in charge of this system of things that we live in. So when you make yourself a friend of the world, you become an enemy of God. Now I'm going to get more specific. It's funny how God just gives me some of these verses just before I teach. Okay? So when he's talking about the world, what is he talking about? Well, I'm going to tell you that it's actually defined. The world equals 1 John, okay, 2:15 through 16. All right? So the Bible best defines the Bible. You know what the best commentary on the Bible is? The Bible. Would you agree with that? Yeah. The best commentary on the Bible is the Bible. He says this: do not love the world, same word, cosmos, or cosmos as we think of it. That's what came from that word. And also cosmetics. Because cosmetics brings order from disorder. It's the order of things. No, I'm not making a joke. That's really where they get that word. Okay? It says, do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now here in James, he says, you make yourself an enemy of God. And there in 1 John, he says, if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you. For all that is in the world, he's going to name it off. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but from the world. He started off this whole chapter talking about what's the source of quarrels and conflicts. It's the pleasures that wage war in your members. Now he points it in 1 John. That's why the Bible tells us to die to yourself. Crucify yourself. That doesn't sound like a very quick one-step process to me. That sounds like a slow, agonizing death. And it is. Jesus in Luke, remember the sower and the 4 kinds of a soil? And he cast his seed out. One landed beside the road on the hard ground. The crows came, or the birds of the air came and ate them. The second kind was in the rocky places. It didn't take deep root. The sun came out, which is persecution, and it withered. But the kind that went with the thorns got choked out. You know what the thorns were? The worries and cares of this life and the pleasures in this life. So again, that word pleasure, same word. So the pleasures, if you cultivate that, will choke out any fruit in your life. Again, that's why we're told to die to self. That's why it says work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It didn't say work for your salvation. I believe that's in Philippians. It says work out. It's given the picture of a garden that you cultivate. Okay? Have you ever had to water the weeds to make them grow? No. You don't have to do that. But if you have a nice, beautiful plant, do you have to water that? You have to water that. And then you got to go and pick the weeds, clear out the ground, put fertilizer. The same thing with work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It's like in the garden. You got to cultivate it. You got to pick out the weeds. You got to water it. Your salvation. So he's telling you, you don't have what you want because you're asking with wrong motives. And then he's warning about the world in verse 5. Or do you think the scriptures speak to no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us. It's really 2 different ways you could look at that. The Spirit that he makes to dwell in us See, there's no caps and little letters in Greek. Actually, it's either all written in caps or all written in Greek. So Spirit, it's not like it's capitalized so we know it's the Holy Spirit. It's probably referring to the spirit that we have, our human spirit. And that spirit is lusting and envying, for the things that he just talked about. So now, here's a question. Verse 6. How do you overcome all that stuff? You just talked about all these, wars we have in our own members that are seeking after pleasure. How are we going to overcome that? That's a good question, right? I want to know. Verse 6. But he, God, gives a greater grace. Therefore, it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So the answer is grace. If you're proud, then you are in opposition to who? God. If you're humble, what does God give you? Grace. Two different things. If you're proud, you're the enemy of God. You're in opposition to God. If you're humble, okay, then what happens? You get grace. That's how you overcome all this stuff. Is God showers his grace on you. He empowers you. Now, he even goes on. How do you get humble? How do you get humble? Well, there is actually steps he's going to give us in the next verses. How do you acquire humility? There's the story, I don't know if it's true or not, of Benjamin Franklin. He wrote in his diary, and he was a deist. But anyways, he tried to work on his humility. But every time he started becoming humble, he became proud of it. Then he had to start over. So, how do we become humble? Good question. Verse 7. We have to, first of all, submit to who? And if you submit to God, that means you're going to resist something else, which is who? Yeah. So they go together, right? Resist Satan. Resist the devil. So submit to God. Now, we talked about at the beginning, it's James, a doulos of Jesus. Doulos, a slave is what it is, means he was totally given over to his master. His whole purpose was to please his master, to know his will and fulfill everything the master wanted. He didn't have his own life. He didn't have his own rights. That's a picture of the Christian who's really walking with God. Instead of saying, oh, God, I want this. God, why not this? God, whatever. It's, God, what do you have for me? God, what do you want me to do? If you have, say, like demonic spirits in your house, do you have to call an exorcist?
No.
No. What do? Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You resist him. It's just like we talked about before. Can you keep the birds from flying over your head? No. Can you keep them from nesting in your hair? Yeah. You see the difference? Okay. You resist the birds by not allowing them to nest in your head. And that's like, well, going through your house and I did a real good house cleaning, several years back, and get out all the bad stuff. Okay, even questionable. I really like this thing. I'm not sure if I should have it. Well, you just answered the question on whether you should have it or not, right? It's just like some of these pictures I have around. I don't sit there and say, should I have that? Yeah, but you see what I'm saying. I mean, I'm being real obvious here. Or the scriptures I have hanging on the wall. I don't wonder, Jesus, God want me to put his word on my wall? Well, I want to put it everywhere, So you resist the devil and he will flee from you. As you submit to God, you naturally do the other. Then as you submit to God, the next step is you draw near to Him. Draw near to God. Now, that's not so much submitting. Submitting causes that result. It's for you to draw near to God. In other words, I want to be so close to God. He's right here with me every day. I'm never alone. Got that? He is closer than any human relationship I have. He means everything to me. And He's more real to me than any person I know. That's drawn close to God. And the good thing is, if you draw close to God, what happens? He will draw close to you. So it's not just you doing it. As a father, I can tell you, when my sons want to be close to me, oh my gosh, I don't sit there and say, okay, well, go pick up the yard, or go out there and wash the car, or go pick up the dog do, or something like that. Actually, it's just the opposite. It just breaks my heart, and I want to draw close to them. You see what I'm saying? It's a reciprocal action. You draw close to God, and does that excite God? I don't understand why. You know what I'm saying? As filthy, sinful creatures, I just know it's true. Then he draws close to us. I mean, this is really an amazing passage. And then, now, for you to submit to God and draw close to Him, what you need to do is cleanse your hands. Your hands represent from the Old Testament your works, okay? Get rid of those filthy works, you sinners. Purify your hearts. That's the motives behind cleansing your hand. It starts in your heart and it manifests in your hands, or the things you do. You see that? Okay. He says, you sinners, purify your hearts, you double-minded. Now, the funny thing is, he used that phrase, double-minded. Remember earlier in James? He talked about being double-minded, and we talked about it means double-souled. Soul, as in you have two souls, okay? In other words, you're like two different people. He's saying, make your decision. It's just like Elijah. If God is God, serve Him. If Baal is God, you serve him, right? Don't sit there and teeter and go back and forth. Make up your mind. Now, verse 9, be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. That's interesting. The only time laughter is mentioned in the Bible is right here. And we're told, let it be turned into mourning. Okay, into sorrowing. Now, I'll say this, and we had talked about before about kind of a lot of people are going through a lot of things, right? And here's a poem. I walked a mile with pleasure. Isn't that funny, with pleasure, what we're talking about here? She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me. Now, I know that's not scripture, but it sure summarizes scripture to me, doesn't it? And here he is, let your laughter be turned in the morning and your joy into gloom. It's almost like, as American Christians, we think it's written in the Bible where Jesus commands us to be happy. Nowhere does that happen. Nowhere does he tell us to be happy. And like I say, the only time laughter is used is right here, where he's saying, yeah, you're out for the good times. You're out to fulfill your pleasures. You're out to fulfill your lust. But you know what? Let that laughter be turned into mourning, because you're repentant now. You're drawn close to God. You're seeing your sin. You're seeing who he is. You're seeing who you are. And then verse 10, humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord and he will exalt you. So the funny thing is, you get low and you're brought low before God, and then you're exalted. kind of seems contradictory in some ways. It's a paradox. Or the Bible does it all the time. I didn't make a list or anything like, for you to have enough, you know what you do? You give it away. It doesn't make sense in the natural, does it? In the natural, we say, no, I got to save. Oh my gosh, my 401k is down to 2 million. I don't know if I'm going to make it. Seriously, that's how we are in this country. And yet God says, he'll take care of us. How do you make sure that, you're protected? You look out for number one. No. You don't look out for yourself. You look out for God. It's just so contradictory, the Bible, what it teaches and what it says. Well, what the previous chapter described as demonic earthly wisdom tells us, right? Totally different. We can't figure it out. We have to go by this. That's how we figure it out. Okay, now verse 11. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges a brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. So now he's warning about gossip, about speaking against a fellow brother or sister. Now, when he says law here, remember I told you there are two laws. There was the Old Testament law, the Torah, and then there was the law of liberty, which is the New Testament law. Which one do you think he's talking about here? In the Greek, it's not the law, it's not articulated. It's not the law, it's law. Okay? He's probably talking about the law of liberty, the New Testament law. So he's saying, be careful about judging. Are we allowed to judge? There's only a few verses like the non-believer or fake Christian knows. One of them is Matthew 7, 1 and 2. Do not judge, so you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Don't judge. That's the only one that the non-believer knows, right? Yeah. In other words, don't say that about me. That's true, and I don't like the way that sounds, is really what they mean. But are we not to judge? Well, let me read this one. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. Here's what Paul says when he wrote the Corinthians. They were going through all kinds of conflicts and lawsuits and whatever, okay? He says this, for what have I to do with judging outsiders? She's talking about people outside the church. Do you not judge those who are within the church? Okay, but those who are outside, God judges. Remove the wicked man from among yourselves. Okay? So right there he tells you, he said, if you're going to have a lawsuit, don't go to the secular courts. Go before the church. Let them judge. So yeah, you definitely do judge. Now what he says in Matthew about judge, do not judge. Everybody quotes that. That doesn't mean you don't use judgment. If you're on a trip and you have to take this route or that route, do you have to judge which one to take? Of course you do. You couldn't wake up in the morning and go through a day without judging. Okay? What he means in Matthew 7:1 is, when he says do not judge, he means don't judge with hypocritical judgment. You know about the speck in your brother's eyes when you have a log in your own? Okay. So in other words, if I'm preaching to my friend, well, don't be stealing. That's wrong. And I'm stealing all the time from the store or whatever. That's what he's talking about. But then he goes on to say, which everybody misses. He says, take the log out of your own eye so you can remove the speck from your brother's eye. In other words, I'm not saying you shouldn't tell a brother not to do something that's wrong. I'm just saying you clean up your life in that area before you tell your brother not to do it. Because then your words will have power. And if you do have a problem with somebody, usually you just go to them. So anyway, verse 12, there's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Now, when Jesus comes, he's the lawgiver. He decides what the law is, and he's going to come to judge the earth. Now, he's talking about the final judgment. And so there's two kinds of judgment. God judges those outside the church, right? And ultimately, you're going to stand before the great white throne judgment in Revelation 20, which is not a judgment you want to go through. That's for non-believers. And there's a destiny after that. It's called the lake of fire. But there's a judgment for believers. Is it for sin? No, you're not judged for sin. You know why? For Christians aren't judged for sin because Jesus paid for it on the cross.
Right.
So why would he bring it up? As far as the east is from the west, so he's cast, our sins away. It doesn't exist anymore, which I'm so thankful for. So what's the judgment for? It's for our works. Remember, if it's wood, hay, and stubble, it's going to burn up. It's just like that one time I gave $10 at a homeless lady, remember, and I called Channel 3, told them about it, and they came by with the news cameras. And I said, it was nothing. Oh, no. Am I going to get a reward for that? No. I ain't going to get anything for that, because that was wood, hay, and stubble. I did it with the wrong motives, right? I wanted to let people see how good I am. It doesn't work that way. What did Jesus say? He said, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. Do things in secretly, and then your Father will reward you openly. If you're looking for the praise of man, you can have that. You can get that. But let me tell you, the crowd is fickle. That's kind of an understatement, isn't it? Yeah, they love you when you're pouring compliments on them, or they love you when you're giving them free stuff. Oh, you're the greatest. And they'll turn on you so quickly. Yeah, it's the way it is. It is the way it is. Okay, now verse 13. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. All right. Now back then, that was a time of a lot of the founding of a lot of cities. And so the Jewish people were very good at commerce and business. And so they usually gave the Jews free citizenship. And so when a city was starting off, they're saying, I could go there for a year, I can make a big profit and then come back. And so that was not an uncommon scenario. And here James is saying, you're saying that you're going to go there. You can go for a year. You're going to engage in profit or engage in business and make a profit. Verse 14, yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Puff of smoke. You guys are still so young. I'm probably the only one who can speak this way. But I'm wondering what happened to my life? All of a sudden I look around, you know what I'm saying? It's like, how did I get to be the age that I am? I'm already 37. I mean, how did I get that way so quickly? So, okay, you guys good. You understand my sense of humor. But, right? It's just like, how does those years pass so fast? Yeah. Am I correct? Yeah. When you're younger, you think you're going to be around for a long time. And even if you don't die by accident or whatever, some kind of, bad thing, it's going to pass so quickly. And I think from the beginning of time, 6,000 years ago to now, think of all the millions and billions of people that have died. He says this in verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. Now, there's the word faith movement that says, I've heard those preachers say, you shouldn't say if God wills. That's doubt. Is that true? Well, if it's true, then Jesus had a lot of doubt. I'll tell you why. Matthew 6, his disciples came to him and said, how do we pray? Show us how to pray. Yeah, it's called the Lord's Prayer. It's really the disciples' prayer, okay? And it's a good model prayer. He said this in Matthew 6:10. Your kingdom come. We're to pray for his kingdom to come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Your will be done. So he's praying for God's will to be done. He's not telling God what to do. And think of Jesus when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. In Matthew 26:42, he said this. Jesus went away again a second time and prayed, saying, my Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. So he basically prayed, if the Lord wills, or Lord, let your will be done. So James talks about it. Jesus talks about it. It's not showing doubt. It's showing submission. It's showing humility. God, I have my own plans. Yeah, and you tell me to ask and keep on asking. But you know what? I got so many ulterior motives. Just let your will be done in the end. It's a good thing to pray. And it's biblical. But like I say, you'll hear the word faith movement say, you can't do that. I've heard them say it a million times, which is very unfortunate. Verse 16, but as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. In other words, I'm going to go to that town. I've already got things planned out for the next year. James is saying that's evil. Okay? Now, if you start a business, they say you should have a business plan. Is that okay? To have a business plan? Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, you got to give it to God and say, your will be done. It's smart to plan now. It talks about the ant. He sees winter coming. Does he plan ahead? Yeah. He gets his food in the harvest. Because maybe later on when his anthill's frozen over, he can't get out. It's smart to plan ahead. Joseph in Egypt, right? He knew 7 years of famine was coming, so what do? He stored up in the 7 plentiful years, right? And that, which is kind of what we're doing now in this time. Is there anything wrong storing up now? I've run into so many Christians who have that Christian knees. Well, I'm just going to trust God. Well, don't come around my house then. Because I'm preparing for me, my sons, and people who can't. And, and something happens, you have to flee from your place, then yeah, come on in. Yeah, you can't be naive. And then here's a good, when people say that to you, a good question to ask them is, do you lock your doors at night? They say, yeah, I thought you trusted God. Why are you locking your doors? There's certain common sense things you do. It's not that you don't trust God. God tells you should have common sense. Do what's expedient, right? Nothing wrong with that. All right, so closing off in verse 17, therefore, to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. So it depends upon the amount of light that you have. The more light you have, the stricter the judgment will be. Okay? So if I know I'm supposed to help a homeless guy passing by my house and I don't do it, to me that's sin. Whereas you might see that guy later and you're not aware of that and you don't help him. To you, that's not necessarily sin. You see what I'm saying? Because it depends on the person and the amount of light that they have and what God told them to do. So if you know the right thing to do and you don't do it, that's sin. Sin, you know what the word is? Harmatia. It's a picture of a target, the bullseye. And you have the arrow and you miss the bullseye. That's what it is. You might get kind of close, but it's missing the will of God.